including our leader, Mr. Nell. And so he does a great job of keeping me in the straight and narrow, and my co-chair, Tom Goodhue. So welcome to you all. Todd or Aaliyah, do you know, are there any new members that we should introduce today that you're maybe aware of?
There was, which I shared with you and Tom, Georgia Conrad with OWP was going to attend, but I got an email a few minutes ago saying she's not able to attend now.
Okay.
And she just said the reason is that she's in DC with the National Association of Workforce Boards. Otherwise, she wanted to attend. So we'll catch her next time, Charlie. But other than that, that's all I know in terms of new folks.
Great, appreciate that. Yeah, I was hoping to introduce her and welcome her because I think part of our commentary and things we'll cover today is what is that relationship between the WRC and the local workforce boards, and what should that relationship be potentially. And so I think that I'd love to be able to have George's participation within that conversation. Sorry, we'll miss her today. So let's see. First of all, just kind of opening remarks. I want to let everybody know that there is lots of stuff that is going on. And in the world of OES, my co-chair, Tom Goodhue, and myself, and Sherry Clark, and Tony Frazier are going to be doing a panel presentation up at the National ACTE Workplace Learning Conference up in Bellevue on Friday. So anxious to see that. I got a call this week, and we're trying to arrange an appointment with Brooke Brownlee and the Clean Energy PAC to try to figure out how we're going to potentially integrate then OES into their programs of study and so forth and certifications. So good progress happening there. So we have some good actions that are continuing. We're continuing conversations, although it may not be quite what I'll call an organized track. We're going to try to continue to thread our way through conversations of engaging further business development and so forth. Sherry Clark is continuing to work on that. And I'm not sure if Sherry, I think, is on the road, but we might get a report from her later. Tom, do you have any comments you'd like to share?
No, you're doing great, Charlie. Just keep on going.
Okay. Todd, did you have anything for the good of the order before we get going here? Okay, great. Public comment. Aaliyah, do we have any public comment?
We have not received any public comment.
All right, we'll take care of that agenda item. And I'm not sure are we at quorum?
We are at quorum as well.
We are at quorum. So let's do the consent and approve the minutes from the March 2025 meeting. Again, Aaliyah's done a nice job of kind of pointing us in the direction of our website online, which now holds all of our materials and so forth. So might take a little bit of getting used to, but all of our materials are setting there. And so can I have a motion? And you'll probably have to accept the minutes. And if you can, just state your name and give me a motion. Anybody?
Dean Craig, I moved we approve the meetings from our last meeting, or minutes from our last meeting, excuse me.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Craig. Do I have a second?
I second. Beth Molenkamp.
Oh, great. Thanks, Beth. Hello. Is there any further discussion of the minutes of March 2025? Are there any objections to the minutes of March 2025? Hearing none, they are passed, and we move on. So we had a great conversation last time, and I'm going to turn the conversation over to Lindsay to continue to lead us forward in regarding our strategy as we look forward and talk through kind of where we left off last time. Lindsay.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Tom. We we left off last time saying we need more time. And so that's why we're here today, right? But just to recap, I think all of you were or most of you were there. For those of you who weren't, Aaliyah has just kind of a running summary that I have kept. And so this part is a little bit repetitive, but I think important. In February, you talked really about Running Start and how there is not one in Oregon, and is that something to tackle? Also really talked about what could happen at the K through 12 level. Again, just as a reminder that the WTDB as a board adopted and approved a definition of the public workforce system as well as the larger workforce system. Certainly K through 12 being a part of that, right? So I just want to remind everyone that was adopted, and its importance because that does obviously have implications on what you as a work readiness committee, choose to do and in what areas. So K through 12, is it something related to CTE? If districts can't do full CT, is there something this committee can guide, support, and advise so that there is something, right? The anything is something theory. And then also coming back to the elementary school math scores and what would it take to really build an initiative focused on that. This is something that Venkat has talked in great depth about, particularly related to how do we start integrating technology and even AI into schools to support getting those scores up. You also talked about OES, right? And just as another reminder and testing an assumption here, this committee, I believe I have heard multiple times, does agree that this committee is a bigger work readiness committee and that OES falls under that. And so is that correct? I'm seeing nods from Charlie, nods from others as well. Okay, great. So that assumption is checked. The Work Readiness Committee is a broader umbrella. OES is one piece underneath that. Of course, talked a little bit again about we're advisors unless we have money, right? So we'll loop back to that at the end when we get to the okay. Now that you've decided on priorities, how are you going to go about doing this, right? Certainly, you guys also talked last time about the major themes from the retreat. That the board's strength is in understanding the system, its players, and data. And so that's an important reminder for the committee as well, right? Is there a role for the Work Readiness Committee to play in terms of understanding system, players, and data so that you can help make sense and also advise to governor and other leadership? Speaking of governor, got to earn the ear. Don't assume you just have it, right? And so what does that mean? How do you align with the governor's priorities where relevant? How do you be strategic to make sure that you are actually giving the governor's office what they need to know to make good decisions? We will come back to the metrics, so I'm going to jump over that. But certainly the shared metrics were an important piece of this conversation so far for the board, and again, implications on the committee, in that metrics can be the pull for the larger system alignment, a reason for credibility, and getting the ear of governor and leadership, and a push when you get the good data, right, on equity, which is a top imperative for the board overall. So we'll keep going down, Aaliyah, because that's basically where we sort of ended, right? At your March 5th meeting, all the themes made sense from the retreat. Again, we confirmed the assumption I just reviewed, and focused on the areas of potential focus. Early education, K through 4, Running Start, CTE. Built into that is expansion and awareness of OES. I think that should also be there. So that's where we're at. And what we want to do today is I want to make sure, and Todd, I'm not sure if this has already been done, but I do want to make sure everybody at least knows what the current chair of the National Governors Association is focusing on. I believe that the areas of focus within the Colorado Governor's Let's Get Ready initiative are highly relevant to what the board and what this committee may be looking toward in the next 2 years. And so in any way for you to get looped in, be a squeaky wheel. As a former NGA staffer, squeaky wheel works. You know, can we join the next academy? Can we be one of the learning states? Can we listen in? There might be something there that is very worth looking at. But I also wanted to make sure that we looked at the early education priority of the governor, so that can inform going forward. Todd, I'm sorry, were you trying to jump in?
Oh yeah, sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, no, we haven't really chatted about this
Okay.
at the state board level or in this group. I was just wondering, maybe you could share a little bit more about NGA and you spent some time there, and sort of maybe talk about the benefits and value add that it brings to our work.
Yeah, absolutely. So the National Governors Association is exactly that, right? It is the Association of Governors, and every state pays dues to be a part of the association. And what they get out of that are two things. There's a legislative advocacy side. And so governors have agendas that they bring to US Congress. And they also support with best practices on the other side, the Center for Best Practices, implementation and policy leadership. And so it is the job every year of the chair, and that is Governor Polis right now, from the state of Colorado, to identify an initiative that they think is worthy of every governor's time, regardless of party. NGA is, of course, very, very bipartisan, and worthy of NGA actually creating projects and learning opportunities around that initiative. And so Oregon in the past has been a part of policy academies. Policy academies have been a part of NGA's agenda for decades. Typically what this means is you get a handful of states who are really cutting edge and sort of, you know, leading the way already around a certain initiative or a set of policies and implementation. And then you get a whole group of learning states. Depending on how far NGA goes with these within the year, you can get as half the states usually engaged in some way, but they're tremendous learning opportunities. And so typically a state that is either in the cutting edge or the learning model will send a team of people for a few days, a couple times a year, to these policy academies. And the learning that happens across states is what is so invaluable. And it is definitely governors' advisors who are part of the team, and then also key leadership from, in this case, especially the workforce board, because it is such a workforce-driven initiative that Governor Polis is focusing on. So I'll stop there, but for those of you who have maybe been involved in National Governors Association initiatives in the past, you probably can say that the learning is very worth it. Not only that though, and this is a key part, I think, what's worth it is the relationship building that happens in your state as a result of being a part of an NGA initiative. You literally are spending the quality time and spending time away from home and home offices. And that includes leadership from the appropriate agencies, your governor's office, workforce board leaders, and that means everything going forward. And so this is probably why I strongly encourage states to try to get engaged. And I'm not kidding about the squeaky wheel, for the board to really say, hey, we want to be involved somehow and start carving that path. It's very worth it just for the relationships and the knowledge sharing within your own state that comes out of being a part of it. Todd, is there anything you would add?
No, that was terrific. Thank you so much, Lindsay.
No worries. So what I might do then is, Aaliyah, if you can go ahead and click on that and we'll share screen, because I would like to show everyone, and you guys can click on this as well. We can put it in the chat. I just want to show you what the Let's Get Ready initiative is quickly. Again, because I think there's potential implications on the work of this committee. So this is the 24-25, and so that what typically happens is these initiatives get sort of rolling in the first year, and then it's the second year in 2025 when they start rolling out some of the academies and projects and learning opportunities. So if you scroll down, there's going to be a set of priorities. Here we go. This is it. So right there. So those bullet points are the 8 priorities of this initiative. And so it's early literacy, numeracy, and high quality curriculum. And so that is talking about the elementary school level. Certainly they are looking at expanded learning and work-based learning. They are looking at dual and concurrent enrollment, right? i.e. running start-like programs, what it looks like, what different states do, what works, what doesn't work. Skills-based learning and non-degree credentials, something you all are quite familiar with, right? How do we actually start giving credit for the skills that are learned and not just the 4-year degrees? And then technology and artificial intelligence in the classroom, right? And so certainly something for you all to think about is how that connects with any initiatives that you might decide to pursue at the early literacy and numeracy level. Educator development support, and then this one, of course, implications on where the full WTDB is going is data systems and the roles of state agencies. And again, I would particularly put in there the role of a state workforce board. Because I think there are implications that the board is starting to think about, and certainly that this committee should think about in terms of, is the state workforce board the place, because different state agencies sit as members around that board, where data can begin to be integrated together. Right now, the state of Oregon has pockets of data in all sorts of places, right? And if you really are trying to pull alignment across multiple state agencies and systems, the role of the board could be to develop an agenda and a plan of pulling data together that can really be demonstrative of where Oregon is or is not or should be on big data points. And that's why the scorecard is part of the focus of these past months and the month coming up for the full board going forward. So I'm gonna stop here because I don't want to spend all day on this. I just wanted to introduce this to you. Are there any questions or thoughts initially before we move on, just on anything that I've said about NGA or the potential initiative?
Let me add real quick. Todd didn't mention it, but we actually ended up, Todd and myself, had a conversation with NGA and DC. I can't remember who, Todd, we spoke to, but the process was really to say, where does an initiative like OES, as an example, which is, I think, touches a number of points, quite frankly, on this priority, where does that fit within the discussion point to be able to make others aware? And so I think that connection and that networking is pretty highly critical to be able to kind of, again, platform tools that are going to indeed support what these 8 points are. So
Great. That's great that you had that conversation. Other questions or comments, thoughts?
So this is Sarla. So would this be a place where you think that if there were ideas that didn't quite align with the governor's priorities that we would pitch? Or would there have to be an intersection or an overlap?
If I'm understanding your question right, I think that is something for the committee and the workforce board to determine. And so I would suggest that if this committee can really home in on the two, maybe three, maybe 2.5 priorities that you really want to push over the next 2 years, and assess, does this align with the NGA initiative and one of the governor's priorities or more of the governor's priorities? I think you're going to have a very strong chance of pitching something or making recommendations and advising to the governor's office, which is an important tool for the board and this committee to start exercising, an important muscle to start strengthening. Because the more that you can align and get the ear of the governor, the more support you get for the initiatives that you want to pursue, right? It's that, it's that snowball. It's that you want to get those gears starting to align. And so I think your question very much is appropriate for how are we going to choose our priorities and do it in a way that we know can leverage support of leadership.
Okay, then I'll hold my comments to when we get to our priorities.
Okay. Any other responses to that? I mean, I'm curious, Charlie and Tom, if you would have any responses to that question.
Not directly. Again, from my perspective, again, it's really trying to balance what ears are we trying to do, and this is what we've been doing, for instance, with the OES platform is very different than traditional workforce talent development board process. I mean, we've talked about strategies and so forth, but this is we're in the field of action at this point, and then we're having this conflict because we don't have any fiscal responsibility to put behind that. So that's when the ear of the governor or the ear of an agency becomes highly critical to the success of what policy we might suggest. So again, I'd love to have Georgia involved in this conversation, representing all of the local workforce boards. Yeah, I think again, our overall task, which was well outlined here, is how do you boil down this broad list to quote unquote actionable items, and where does action start, stop, and policy start and stop? I don't know if I'm making any sense, but that's what I'll throw out.
Yeah, I agree. It's just that I think I've only been in 2 meetings, and so I'm just trying to get a handle on what what the areas of focus have been. I don't think I've seen a certain area of focus that I'd like to bring up, but I'll wait till it's the right time. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, let's start to go there then. I have more pop-ups coming up. There we go. Okay. So you all probably know, right? I mean, and we can go into detail on this if you want, and if you all have information that I think that you think should be put on the table, I think please do. But when you look at the governor's priorities, there are 3 major priorities, and somewhat broadly defined, I think, right? One of them is housing, homelessness and housing. One of them is behavioral health and mental health, and that has a very big workforce component because one of the goals is how are we really making sure that we are training mental health and behavioral health providers at a level that is going to meet the need right now in the state of Oregon. And then the third one is improving K-12 student outcomes. So, that's enough for you to know, right? That those are 3 priorities that you could get some hooks into. That's what you're going for here. And so if your priorities are expansion of OES, potentially an elementary school math outcomes, and looking into innovations like AI and technology that can be integrated in. That hooks into the NGA initiative, where there could be tremendous learning opportunities, right? And then you're also looking, of course, at Running Start, also hooks into learning opportunities from NGA, and CTE, which is very much, I think, expanded learning, work experience, the integrated learning, again, which tremendous learning could come out of the National Governors Association. So with that, you already, I think, have some ways to look at, are these rivulets coming together, right? And then what does that mean for the Work Readiness Committee and its choices? So at this point, that is the discussion I want to open up. You have named the topics, you have repeated them, and then you also know the governor's priorities and potential national learning. Are there other contexts, do you think, that should be brought in to help inform this discussion? That's one question. And then I would love to just open it up for, what does this tell you about where you think the committee should be going in terms of priorities?
So may I start?
Please.
So I just would like to say briefly first that I'm assuming that each member on this board was nominated because of the domain knowledge we bring, the experience we bring, and the governor thought that that would be helpful, right, for this board. So in my case, that's engineering and computer science, and also being one of the minorities in this field. Also an intersection with the semiconductor industry and the fact that the CHIPS Act is getting so much focus, and particularly in Oregon, right? So that's a niche, but I would just broaden it out to engineering and computer science, right? So given that, I do see this aspect of early education and math, but there's a lot more that we would have to do in order to make a convincing, actually, we wouldn't have to do a lot. There's a lot of data, right? That these are high economic opportunities, that we are not represented well, minorities and women, and we're losing out talent. And although I'm an immigrant, I'll say a lot of our master's and graduate programs and college programs are filled with people from other countries, right? Now, given that in Oregon, what I've heard, I think from Deb and Venkat, is that our graduation rates are not great. Math has already been pointed out. There would have to be something broader, which I have many ideas about and proposals, but I think we're really missing out in this very high economic opportunity, and especially for our diverse background. So that's sort of the background. I'd like to say, I don't see it aligning with just early education, because the focus here has to be in, of course, early education and math, but middle school, high school, awareness building, the things that our teachers and guidance counselors may not even know as far as career paths. And the last thing I'll say, that I'm saying all this after having spent a year talking to educators, talking to high school kids, going to school fairs. And of course, I have direct experience from my own experience at Siemens or Mentor Graphics, where we would want to hire people locally for retention, and we could not, right? So it's just a huge opportunity that I feel, at least from the discussion so far, that we're just like barely nibbling on, So that's what I have to say. And so I don't know how that aligns, overlaps, and what we can do. And of course, would love to hear comments.
So please do speak up, everyone. I want to just, this is, I think, incredibly helpful and important, exactly the conversation we want to be having. I would like you to frame again, because you repeated multiple times, there's a missed economic opportunity here, right? And so can you reframe or just restate, I should say, what is the missed opportunity, so that we really understand implications potentially for work of this committee?
Well, the missed opportunity, I will say, is well, there are two, but let me talk about the minority and diversity aspect, right? To share a data point about we hire about 17 to 18% women in this field of engineering computer science, right? In countries like India and Egypt, they're like 35 to 40%, right? So essentially, we see about 50%, I'll just roughly say that if I include other minorities and women, 50% of our population not participating in this economic opportunity, right? So that's, and we can get more data on this. That is the one very major, miss that's happening when we need talent. The second, I have only one data point, but we would gather a lot more. That, for example, the number of electrical engineers in the United States is going down. And when you look at the semiconductor industry and so many fields, that is a very important field of engineering. But I only have it for that. I could get it for other fields of engineering. And that's why we're having to hire people from outside, from the country to come in and fill these. So that's just one data point. So the missed opportunity is just what I said, the lack of representation, and I think partly is lack of awareness. I mean, I'll just share one more thing. I went to a school fair that from the CTE for Washington County invited me to. And if I asked them, what's an engineer? Do you know how many kinds of engineers there are? There is complete blank looks. So I'll stop there.
That's great. That's perfect. Thank you. Okay, let's get some discussion going. Charlie, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I deeply appreciate the conversation at this point. So, and I think I see Venkat has just weighed in and so forth. I'd like to actually just throw out that, at least from my educational experiences and industry and education over now almost 40 years, because I've been involved in school to work education that long through the organizations, the piece that still rings true with me, which is actually proven by data, is that oftentimes academic principles cannot be understood because they're not within the context of use. And that's a real key factor of why CTE education works, is that it takes an academic principle and it applies it to a problem, and the students' light bulbs come on like crazy. So from a standpoint of how does your state support that in their school system, it makes no sense to me that Oregon remains a grant CTE funded state. There's no prioritization for contextual learning. And yet the statistics continue to come out year after year after year that your graduation and passage rates all exceed if you are CTE based, or if you even have a few CTE based. And so the piece to me from this committee and so forth is trying to look for tools that we can actually rely on that assist us in this process of conversation of how do you bring context to this. I'm not going to overshare in regard to OES, but if you look at those 10 factors of the OES model that we have, or those 10 skill sets, and I'll be presenting this Friday, I continue to define those as foundational learning that has to be integrated within a student's path, because you build your hard skill sets upon those baseline skills. And so that's one of the pieces that we keep talking about. And they're all important: math, communication, or math, reading, science, and so forth. But students' ability to be confident and engage is also critical within that process of moving those skill sets forward. So I'll stop there. What it did, Lindsay, and others for me, is as we went through those, both the NGA as well as the governors, it keeps popping into my head is, if you don't have a strong foundation, it's hard to have a successful learner.
Okay, that's great, Charlie. And a couple things to highlight. I think that you said that are really important is, what tools do we have, that are speaking and responding to the challenges and the missed opportunities, right? And so CTE, OES, you're repeating those as tools that we know work. They're just not at the scale that we need, right? Just paying attention to the chat too, if everyone can make sure the chat is open. Certainly lots of great comments in there about Oregon Promise, about education plan and profile, EPP. I almost see these as tools to leverage as well, which I think is part of what folks are talking about. Venkat, I would like you to take the floor now. Give us your thoughts and your comments.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay,
yeah.
Good. Thank you, Charlie and Sarla and Lindsay for your comments. I just want to emphasize a couple of things. One is that in the semiconductor industry, to Sarla's point, Oregon has a huge opportunity, and we are seeing gaps between what industry wants to fill and what we are producing as graduates through our university system. And that gap is increasing over time. So there is a semiconductor council, and that's trying to understand what the industry projections are and how we can fill that gap. So, but it comes back, if you draw a line backwards, it really comes back to STEM proficiency. And we just don't have, our proficiency scores are dropping. And I just wanted to share a quick slide if I have permission to share. Let me see if I can do that. Give me a moment. Just gonna see if I can pull this out. Okay, just let me know if you can see this slide. Give me a thumbs up, somebody. Okay, good, excellent. So, this was a firm Edunomics lab, and they gave a presentation to the legislature. I got these slides from Kyle Ritchie Knoll from the Oregon Business Council, and so this shows reading proficiency, and so this ties into early learning, but then there's a component of this in the next slide which looks at math. But the gray line is all Oregon students. It's broken out by ethnicity. And this is the dotted line is inflation, and the green line is how much we're spending per pupil, which is way higher than inflation, and yet we don't have the outcomes. And similarly, if you look at math scores, they paint a similar picture. But and math today, overall STEM proficiency and math proficiency, Oregon is 48th in the country. Massachusetts is #1, and we went from number 46 to 48. So it's really abysmal in terms of what we're doing in our K through 12 system. So this really needs to turn around, and so making this a priority would help. What is happening is the STEM Investment Council has made middle school math a priority, but clearly what we're doing is not helping. So we need to do something different, and this is where the leaning into those AI tools that I mentioned makes a lot of sense. If you can bring that into the classroom to help teachers learn the material, the pedagogy associated with math and science learning. And also these tools are so good at personalized learning concepts for students because every kid learns differently. So making this a priority makes a lot of sense. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing these slides. And I'm happy to provide some information from the Semiconductor Council on what the industry identified gaps are and how they're changing over time, so that we can work backwards and try to influence some of that through this committee. Thank you.
So thank you, Venkat. And Todd, you have your hand up, and then Sarla, and then Venkat, I would like to come back to you because I also want to hear your thoughts on the implications of what you just shared on choices for this committee and for the workforce board. So Todd and Sarla.
Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you, Venkat, for that. I just I haven't heard you chat about it for a while, Venkat. I'm guessing others on the call haven't heard it all. Could you say a little bit more about the AI tools and perhaps other resources that you've been thinking about in your work with the STEM Council, semiconductor folks, and how those might have impact in getting to solutions related to the data you just showed us? Thank you.
Yeah, so there are tools like Khan Academy has something, I think it's called Khan Migo. And so they are able to bring these tools into the classroom and assist teachers. So when I take a sample poll, not a very scientific poll, but a sample poll of teachers, I'm told that teachers are overburdened with class sizes and administrative burden. So they have grading issues and keeping up with curriculum development. And this is where the tools are really, really helpful. And then the second thing is professional development for teachers, because they are unable to absorb new material fast enough to teach. And this is where the tools are very helpful because they help teachers learn the material. And because of the personalized component of these AI tools, they're able to tailor the content towards a way a student learns, right? And so the productivity aspect of imparting education goes up by orders of magnitude, and students are able to grasp the material faster. So this is the implications of doing something. And I say this because we have a huge opportunity, right? Given where we are at, there's only one way to go, and that's up. And so we can leapfrog some of the other states if you were to adopt these technologies.
Hey, Venkat, in your opinion, what would be the capital outlay to try, tinker with, and sort of pilot some of these things you've been thinking about?
Yeah, it wasn't a whole lot. I had done a math initially about just looking at the number of students in the school district and what something like Khan Academy was proposing charging, but this was a couple of years ago. I think it came to a little over $5 million. But I am meeting with somebody this week to understand a little bit more about what kinds of tools are available. So I'll have a better update in terms of cost and details. But since this board, since this committee, or even the Workforce and Talent Development Board doesn't control funding, we'll have to look at some other avenues to be able to raise that. The other problem, Todd and Charlie, that I see is really our system of decentralized education in Oregon. If I see some states like Alabama, they have a huge turnaround in STEM proficiency. And this is because they don't have as much local control as Oregon has. And so making school districts adopt recommendations is tougher in our state than it is in others. But I don't know how to work around that, but I'm open to suggestions.
Good luck on that one. I've been fighting that one for years.
Thank you, Venkat. Sarla, thoughts, comments?
Yeah, so first, 100% agree with what Venkat just focused on, and that's not just going to help the semiconductor industry, but people who are into the sciences. But I think it's interesting that all of us are doers, it looks like here. So we start going to the solutions, right? But if you look at this challenge, it's a very big challenge, right? And we'll have to look at it holistically and see what are the various elements that are going to help with this, right? And the challenge being, as I'm putting it, the lost opportunity for some people in the field of engineering and computer science, right? I'll just leave medicine aside because I think it's more well understood by students, right? So, for example, first the fundamentals, what Venkat is talking about, that that is absolutely critical. But for example, the other fundamental is if you don't study physics in high school, you're pretty much going to be cut out from going into engineering, computer science, and engineering at least, right? So our schools don't mandate physics, I don't think so. And I have experience of this from the East Coast as well. So that's another fundamental. And in order to get these fundamentals, I think we really have to have some educators involved in this discussion, right? For example, I met Chris, I think his last name is Pluth. He's the director of CTE for Portland schools. And I met him at an AI meetup, and he said, well, we're having these what do you call them? The not the laws, but the legislation that's going through that computer science has to be mandatory, but there's no money behind it, right? So what are we going to do, right? So things like that. So the perspective of educators is very important to this discussion. There should be really not just us talking about it. And the last thing I'll say is that the other aspect of it is the diversity part that I'm saying. And I'm not just saying it because it's, it's nice, but it's really 50% of our population that's not participating in this. So if we talk about math, like why are girls turned off by math? What's the social aspects? And what are we going to do as we're working on the fundamentals to attract more of our minorities? And how are we going to, and the last aspect is that I don't think our counselors and teachers have the time to even guide students because they're not aware. So there's a fundamental part about what we are teaching and how we are teaching it and measuring it. We've been talking about STEM for my 30 years of my career, and I haven't seen the needle move. I haven't seen the needle move. So we have to do something. We have to really measure it and see that. And then there's the fundamentals, and then there's a socialization and providing. So all that I'm saying is that it'll take more than this discussion, but if we agree that this is an area that truly we're not focusing on a holistic way, what can we do? Maybe we outline 4, 5, 6 things and say, hey, we're going to focus on these 2 things and make that as a recommendation and have a phased plan. Because if we get an 8th grader interested in engineering and computer science right now, it's going to be 8 years, right? Not 8 years, 12 years before, or not an 8th grader, but middle school, yeah. But even an 8th grader, it's going to be 8 years before they're ready for the workforce. This is a long timeline. And I just feel so much urgency about this because of the lack of progress that I have seen over my time in this field.
So I want to pick up on that, and then Pod, I see you have your hand up too. But I do want, this may seem obvious, right? But I'm going to say it anyway. That's what a facilitator can do, is state the obvious. So the idea of a phased plan, right? And what I'm also hearing very clearly is that there is the long haul. If we are to really go with, let's jump in to this K through 12, and even K through 4 student outcomes situation. I mean, that slide is very telling, right? We just keep pouring money into this. Money's going up, but outcomes seem to still be going down. Like they're not even, right? And that's very telling. So is there, in addition to a phased plan, in the priorities? I mean, really, you guys have already only been discussing sort of 4 major priorities, right? And in those, there seems to be the long run view, if we were to focus on K through 4 foundational math, get these teachers the help they need quickly, right? And so Venkat, your answer to Todd's question, what would a pilot look like, was, well, I'm talking to people this week, right, to see what it would cost to actually start integrating AI tools like Conmigo or whatever it might be into schools right now. So there's that. But Sarla's right, that's going to be 8 years from now, we might start to see some outcomes with graduates. But Charlie, you have also repeatedly said, that CTE is tried and true. Those requirements are often higher than high school graduation requirements. It's contextualized. So what is it that we can do right now for CTE students who are at the high school level, particularly, right, that can start feeding them into the pipeline potentially for engineering, potentially for these jobs that are going unfilled? Is there something this committee does, particularly in light of the board's priorities around diversity and equity, particularly because of Sarla's stats around women and females? So I'm wondering where people's heads are right now in terms of, is there the long haul focus that this committee wants to choose, and then a short-term focus that might be a combo of CTE and Running Start that really gets to where you want to go? So just putting that out there. Again, it may have been stating the obvious. Beth, was that your hand up? No. Beth Mollenkamp? No. Okay. Todd, you have a comment?
Thanks, Lindsay, for that. And just listening to Venkat and Sarla talk, your point on getting the educators involved has some history with the WTDB that I'm sure Venkat remembers. And that goes back to, I think, a task force we formed in 2018 called the AI Task Force. That task force was formed at the behest of Venkat's predecessor and Venkat, who came to Ken Madden, who was chair at the time, and myself, and said similar things to what you already mentioned today, Sarla, around, hey, we can't recruit folks in state and in country. We have to go outside of that to find talent. What can we do in Oregon to grow more of our own? And so we ended up establishing the AI task force. And listening to you, Sarla, made me think, as we got into that work, we actually did establish a curriculum subcommittee. I think it was called Venkat, if I remember right. And to my surprise, it ended up being quite impactful and resulted in one key outcome. And maybe there were more, Venkat, I forget, but that key outcome that I recall was that a new CS program was actually developed and implemented at Oregon State University. I think it was a master's degree program. I also remember vaguely other either new programs or broadened, enriched programs at the K-12 level up in the Portland, maybe it was Hillsborough School District, or it doesn't matter, but it had good impact. So I just wanted to flag what you said, Sarla. I think maybe that does apply here and could be helpful. Speaking of being a doer and trying to fix things.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'm just curious about is that some of these things that I'm aware of some of this in talking to you, Todd, previously, is that these have worked sort of laterally. I feel like the committee here and Venkat and others have influenced, these people, but a lot of this stuff is going to need money. And if we can't influence the governor, and then whatever the path is, I'm very new to this, to put money behind this. For example, if you have to educate the counselors and who is going to do that? Are they going to be given time to do it? Then how are we influencing her? It happens to be her at this time, that the governor's policies for this understanding. Because this is a very serious, I know I'm in it, that's why it probably seemed, but it's a very serious problem and a huge hole, So.
Yep. Great question. And I do at some point want to highlight some metrics related to that because I think there's some implications for this committee on where the board wants to show their, demonstrate their own, performance metrics related to that influence. Howard, you have your hand up.
Yes, thanks, Lindsay. I was just curious. One of the things that I received yesterday was a press release, and it was the title, Impact of Federal Cuts on Student Learning Projects at the Oregon Department of Education. The first thing that was cut was the math instructional framework and Oregon Literacy Practitioners Network, Adolescent Literacy Framework, Instructional Framework, and Region in-person training for educators. How does that, if we're going to be seeking funds, how does that impact this committee's efforts? And are these potentially, like the math, an opportunity for us to try to get a way to plug those gaps that have now occurred because of the lack of funding?
Great question, Howard. So not only looking at the priorities, but looking at the implications of the federal cuts on this very specific thing that you're talking. Is this an opportunity, therefore, for the board and this committee to be gap fillers and figure out ways to do so. Responses?
No, not directly. Actually, I just wanted to point out, Sherry, you had your hand up earlier and then it went back down. Did you get a chance to ask your question?
It's fine, Charlie. This discussion is so, I mean, it can go so many different directions, and I'm really loving what I'm hearing. I guess just in a real quick nutshell, the context and the relevance is so important. And I made a comment in the chat that this is why we need to spread the wide net. This is why we need industry at the table. Educators cannot possibly provide the relevance that we're looking for without the help of industry. And we've had some really good successes in OES with that, but we're still not there. There's still a lack of understanding about what that looks like and what we need in terms of educators. What do they need to really do this work? And I think that's a big part of this conversation is how do we get to the table together and actually get the work done?
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks, Charlie. I'm sorry, Sherry, I didn't see your hand.
It's okay.
So Venkat, you have raised this multiple times too, right? And so again, stating the obvious, a distinct role of the State Workforce Board and therefore any of its committees is to introduce and integrate in the industry context, right? And so I'm curious, if you were to play out this idea of this committee having a focus on filling the gap per Howard's comments, that is likely to only get worse before it gets better, right? And at least look into and introduce supportive AI, as Venkat is describing. Is there a role to create a project and implement that deliberately pulls in industry to inform the math that has to be taught? I mean, I have to imagine there is not going to be other place where this happens, right? Or partnering with CTE at the high school level to do so. But Venkat, I'm curious your thoughts on what would this look like? What would this look like if this committee were to take the reins and move forward? What do you think could happen in a year or 2 years? Let's try working backwards from there.
Yeah, where I would start with, Lindsay, is identifying the industry gaps in Oregon, and especially the industries that require STEM proficiency. And I agree, it's both math and science. So the semiconductor industry in Oregon is big, and they already have charts and projections about the shortfall. And so I would lead with industry needs, not just in the semiconductor industry, but also the healthcare industry. And how pervasive AI is going to be across all sectors of the economy. And given that, we can then work backwards to say, or just drive the point home that STEM proficiency is incredibly important for a long-term metric. And in the short term, I think there's more awareness that can be created by industry again. When I was in high school, we had industry people coming to talk to us about a day in the life of a technician or a day in the life of an engineer, and those were incredibly inspiring. So we need to do a little bit more of that, across the state, not just in the Portland metro area. So this committee can figure out ways to help with that awareness in the short term. But in the long term, we should just lead with industry. Is my thought.
Well,
okay, great. Thank you. Beth?
What do you think, Venkat, about the university's role here? Because, for example, I would think if the universities don't know what kind of math is needed, to become an engineer or something like that, that's a gap in itself, right? So I do like what you're saying, that you understand what the industry needs are. We need 100 engineers, or we need so many computer scientists. So here's the economic opportunity, right? And then there's the bridge, because I've been talking to Andrea Bollinger, who is OSU's CIO, about, and we have been talking about it more from a diversity perspective as to how we do outreach, and that I would be ready to pull in, women engineers. I mean, it's not that it's going to be, we only talk to women. We talk to everyone, but we show up as women and other minorities so that people can see, well, you can be this, right? But my real question is around, and so she's sort of like, she wants to get all the universities together, and have this kind of a strategy discussion about what is the role of the university in the outreach to our minorities and diversities and schools. So I think in what you're saying, what do you think about their role here? Because they're the ones who are teaching, college level math, right? Which is needed for the industry.
Yeah. So Sarla, I can only tell you about what's happening in the semiconductor industry, where the industry gaps are being fed back to our universities, like University of Oregon, Oregon State, and they are coming back to us saying that, look, there are students who are interested in a semiconductor track, but the problem is they don't have what it takes in terms of math and science. So we are having to put them into remedial courses, and they just don't even have a basic understanding of algebra or pre-calculus, which is like really fundamental to a STEM career. So and they lose interest. And so this is where we need some university help as well, but universities are also starved of funding. It's a similar problem. Yeah. But there are pockets where I'm seeing some activities, particularly in Oregon State, because faculty and graduate students are reaching back into K through 12 to try and fix the math problems, but they're very small pockets.
Well, that's good to hear. Lindsay, I don't want to hog the whole discussion, but I'd like to say one last thing about what you said, and I just want to throw it out because it's really hard for so many people to just figure out what the priority should be. But I liked what you said, that if we separate this out into a more fundamental aspect, which is going to take a long time, like Venkat is talking about math, I would really want to add physics here as well, somehow in the high school and middle school levels, because it's really critical. So I would propose that. But then a more short term, as you're talking about, that if we can get our foot in the door with the CTEs into schools, which is what I'm sort of trying to do on a volunteer basis, right? Go out, have panel, have an outreach to schools, and influence the kids in the high school right now, showing them the career paths and the salaries, because I've seen some of the CTE career pathways, and I feel that depending on which district it is, many of them are focused on the non-4-year degree program path, which is very important, but they're missing out on the engineering part and the 4-year degree kind of thing, right? So to complement, and so that could be a more short-term socialization, and how do we do that with the resources in this team and making the connections, right? So that would be, I really would like to see physics being added to the fundamentals, and then the socialization aspect as a more near-term thing.
Great. Okay. Noted. And also, I'm going to say, I want to hear from Beth. You've had your hand up for a little bit. And then I want to come back to the short-term, long-term, because in the next half hour, what we really want to get to is how much can this committee take on? What's going to be the biggest bang for your buck across the areas and priorities that you've already started floating and circling around? I mean, the good news is that you are still sort of sticking to the priorities that you originally talked about. So we're going to come back to that. But Beth, please go ahead.
Thank you. I've been really interested to hear the discussion.
It's okay.
Pardon? I've been really interested to hear the discussions. And what has come up for me is that we have some established ways of creating this communication and being able to provide supports, but it seems like they're being missed because the CTE programs have advisory boards where industry interaction is essential and is required for those. And then we've been working with Career Connected Learning since we got our navigators on board in 2022. And what I'm what I'm hearing is that somehow we're missing. We're not getting everybody engaged as they should be. And I just want to identify ways that we can really make sure that that is happening, so that we're not missing the opportunities. If people aren't being approached to, not like Sarla having to go and say, hey, I want to volunteer, but people reaching out and asking for you to bring your expertise to the schools, that would be essential. And we're want to keep furthering these efforts, because even if we just only focus on CTE, we also know that it's a relatively small number of students in Oregon who are completers in CTE. We need to be able to spread this a much wider net. That's why career connected learning was established, and we need to make sure that we are providing all those opportunities. I agree, like making sure counselors are informed, but they're overworked. So we have to come up with some ways to make sure that they can get the support that they need. And I put a few things in the chat. We have our Career Connect Oregon website that does have an AI tool, and also has a whole pages of information about different career pathways that students can work through. But I would love to know where it is that we're missing, so we can fix that broken link.
So Beth, this is a really important point, right? Because I had just said bang for our buck, right? And where are we going to get our biggest impact? And so, correct, CTE it's a relatively small student population, right, that makes up the CTE world, and yet very effective. And we know the stats, and that's nationally verified. So I'm curious then if you have strong thoughts now on, so which of these other programs, I mean, you've listed out, a few. Is it that you as a committee need to come up with the material, the tools that are tried and tested, and as Venkat's doing, he's already doing the research and talking with people this week. And then there is a role for this committee to actually get those tools out to multiple programs that are going to hit many different, of the audiences that we're talking about. Curious about your thoughts on that, because you do know the system and the programs well.
Yeah, so I think we have a lot of tools that are there already. We just need to be able to get the avenues to communicate them, whether it's through industry organizations, through this group itself, sharing the information. I think we have, we also have the navigators I just put in the chat as well too. And those navigators are great contact points. So they're, focused around the state, so that somebody doesn't have to figure out who it should be that they connect with or anything else, that they can find that really easily. I do think that that seems to be a where sometimes our navigators weren't sure where to go, who to start with. And so if this group were able to say, hey, these are some really key connections, that would be fantastic to go ahead and make those connections now. We're going to be having a meeting next week that's going to be a larger convening. And if I was able to provide that kind of information to the navigators and those who attend that, then we'll be able to create a stronger safety net, for all this work to continue and support everybody who is doing this similar work. I think too that there are some issues that we could go back to, because I was involved a few years ago with a root cause analysis and some work related to equity in computer science was what we focused on specifically. And that was a really important exercise to go through, getting feedback from students, like, why aren't they taking these courses? What's the barrier? Really doing some surveys and focus group, questioning and really getting an idea of what was missing. And we found it was multiple things. It's not just one. It's so many different pieces. but we need to be able to have the resources to continue doing that kind of work, because it takes time It takes some support. It takes people getting out of their preconceived, like where their biases are and everything else as well too. But it made a real difference in my region, and I would love to be able to see that kind of work continue, which I think would have benefits that would pay off quite a bit. And yes, Venkat, I will share that in the chat too. Okay.
Great. Great. Thanks, Beth. And so, Sherry, you have your hand up. I'd love to hear thoughts. And then I want to do just a quick wrap up and see where we're at in terms of making decisions. Sherry?
Yeah, so there's clearly not one thing that's going to move this dial. It's going to be multiple things. But I wanted to share that in OES, we created videos to show students how these skills were being used. And we could use more videos. We could use videos from these different sectors so that a healthcare teacher could maybe select out of more healthcare type ones, or engineering and so forth, because teachers do have the opportunity to switch out some of the activities and things. Another thing that we wanted, that we see as a desire that we have, is to put, when companies come up with projects, we can put them on the last page of OES. And what that does is it does bring that awareness. So there are more things that we can use organ employability skills for in terms of building that awareness, getting video content out there, getting that video content out there that shows, minority folks that are doing these jobs and bringing that awareness as well. So I think there are ways that we can help with the tool OES to continue to build that awareness. And I know, some people haven't, for various reasons, haven't gone in and looked, and they don't really know what all it's about. But it would be nice, for some of you maybe to come to an overview training and just hear about it, so that you can think, oh, maybe we can put this video in here. Maybe we can put this activity in here. Maybe we can put this project in here. And again, it's an open website that anyone in Oregon can get into. That's free and open. And so I'm just saying, anytime we can leverage what we've got to build that awareness, we would love to continue to do that through OES.
And Sherry, while you have the floor, for those of you who are still learning about what OES is, can you just give the quick rundown of what ages and scope of this? Because I think it's really important to hear that things can be added to OES, just like things can be added to CTE, just like things can be added to career connected learning, just like things can be added to, or you can partner with the STEM hubs. Point being here that what I'm starting to hear is that if this committee commits to the right research around industry need, the right research around AI tools that can start to fill gaps and voids, then is there a package that gets put together, but then can be put out there, to Beth's point, across many different programs to hit many different ages and audiences? So Sherry, can you just give us the real quick,
we have a
folks
very
keep
slim
learning.
version of OES online for all the way down to first grade. So we have elementary, we have middle school with an avatar in there that explains the concepts to kids around tasks that they're doing, so that they start to see themselves as workers and get excited about it. They start celebrating the skills that they have. That really helps their mindset in terms of thinking about careers, because now it's something that they're celebrating, not something that we're putting on them. Then we have the high school version. We have it in Spanish and Russian. We have 5 other languages that we have packets on. We teach in Tier 1 and Tier 2. So that's helping kids with disabilities that might need something down at a different level. We have all of those kinds of things in there. And then we have an online version that anyone can get to and can participate in, that's run on a free open Canvas shell. So our reach is really, really big. What we did in the work readiness one that we feel is so important is we gathered about 50 different videos of companies around the state. The students look at these ideas through these company videos. So how does this company use adaptability? How does this company use collaboration and those kinds of things? And since we're focused a lot on some of the computer, semiconductor and so forth today, I'm just going to say that one of the things that we heard is that we have a lot of engineers that come in and they can't handle feedback. And so even though they have the skill set to be an engineer, they walk away. So that's one of the things that we try to do in there, is we try to help them understand feedback and understand that feedback isn't competitive. Feedback is how we grow together. So you can see how those things all work together. And then students do small activities based on what they see in those companies. And it took us a long time to get companies on board. Once we did, it started becoming a lot easier. But the idea always was that we could add more videos. We could cross-reference them for teachers, so that if a teacher is in a math class and they're teaching analysis solution mindset and they want to choose specifically in engineering, semiconductor, healthcare, it is very flexible and adaptable in that way that a teacher could choose those videos. Video content is so important because our kids say to us, you want us to match our skills and abilities to things, but we really can't see inside the buildings that we drive by every day. So we can use video content to help expose and bring that awareness to students. So I think there's, again, I don't want to act like it's the end all be all, because I know it's not, but there's more we can do and leverage within that curriculum that, again, is free and open access. The last thing I'll say is we have a families and caregivers section in there so that families and caregivers can get involved in this work as well. So we've thrown a very wide net. So the more we can take these conversations and start just plugging some of those things in, I think we could make some significant gains.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thanks, Sherry. Todd, you had your hand up. It's down now. Did you have a comment or a thought?
I'm just going to put it in the chat.
Okay, great. So one thing I want to draw everybody's attention to is sort of one of these last comments in the chat, because Venkat, I think what you say here is potentially really important, that what you're advocating for are tools that assist teachers and students with math and science concepts, pedagogy tracks students needing extra help. Conmigo is just one example, right? But if we were to go with this idea that advocating for tools that assist teachers and students, right? And yes, it is around math and science. If that is a goal, and you then parallel that with this board and this committee's unique role in understanding industry need, right? So that's the context of finding those tools to fill the gaps that are here and are coming. And per Beth's points, then there is a way to track the programs that are out there that are your ways of getting this information out. Is that worth this committee's time? Part of what I want to know too is how much of this is already out there, right? And I think that the answer to that is that a lot of it is already out there, but it does need a somebody, right, or a committee to pull it together and package it together in a way that is going to have impact. You all have talked about lots of programs and ideas, but I'm curious if what Venkat put in the chat there captures what it is that could be done. And then if we started, this is almost a business plan, right? That you could potentially put together in terms of how do you then get liftoff? How do you identify the programs that could use this packaged material? How do you get support from leadership and the governor by making the case that more shortfalls are coming. And if this is a top priority for her, student outcomes, right, at the K through 12 level, here's one way to get big impact with perhaps not such big investment. I'm curious now at this point in our call, how many of you are feeling like this is something that you could develop as a committee, a business plan around, and it would be worthwhile? You have enough relationships, programs, and ability to do the research and pull the right stuff together from industry. Thoughts on that?
I'm going to pitch in real quick, Lindsay, because one of the things I've always felt is the strength of the WTDB, and quite frankly, the strength of this committee, is really that we are a convener. And I think when you take a look at what can we do, we can bring different perspectives together for the purposes of actually tackling some of these issues. So what I see as the basics of this is that simply because we are a convener, simply because we do have the amount of people that sit on this particular committee, there's an opportunity there to network through all of these pieces. And I've seen it in the chat and so forth. You know, Eric was saying we have other agencies and other people that we could bring into this conversation, speaking of school populations and so forth. And so this group is one of the few, I think, in the state that actually represents such a breadth of both governmental as well as private industry. So I personally think that convening opportunity is something we might want to take a look at. I think it's going to take some coordination from staff, though. So I want to throw that out there.
And Charlie, convening to what purpose? Just finish that thought for this.
Yeah, exactly as Venkat has said, is that I can't help but believe that there hasn't been industry-specific conversation about the need for math and sciences, for instance. But again, as we've said here, that's a broader question, and there may already be things that are working together, either in STEM hubs or within these. Who was the one that basically talked about the independence of Oregon's various schools and so forth? That's one of the pieces of this process, is pulling that together so that we don't recreate the wheel.
That's great. That's great, Charlie. And what that also makes me think of is what's coming out of these, you know, the parallel conversation for strategic plan and scorecard with the full board is absolutely what you said, is that this board is the board that understands the systems, the programs, the players, and the networks. And so I think, to your point, how do you take this idea for something real that could come about related to tools that assist teachers and students with math and science at the right levels at the right time, and leverage the networks and the convening power and the knowledge of programs, the map in your heads, right, of programs out there to actually get something off and running. Reactions and thoughts to this, I don't want to put words in your mouth, and so I want to make sure others who are on, who maybe haven't had a chance to weigh in, when you look at that basic concept of advocating for tools that assist teachers and students with math and science, and listen to this conversation about the power of this board and this committee, where are you? What are you feeling? Thumbs up, we should go down this track. This is worth our while. It brings in what you have done in the past, including OES. Yep, thumbs up, okay. Okay, just making sure I get enough thumbs up here. Okay, great. I see some frozen people too. Okay, so a question then, you know, what we can get into quite easily, right, is the organizing of this, right, the actual plan and how you go about doing this. I am curious that one thing I assume is still on the table, but I want to double check, is the concept of running start and dual enrollment, right? And so I would love to hear from some who have thoughts. Beth, are you putting your hand up? Yes.
Yeah, I am, because well, I'm jumping in before Eric, but having been the dual credit program manager at PCC, I think that the perception that we don't have dual credit or opportunities for students to earn college credit is not necessarily accurate. What we don't have maybe is a consistency available around the state with similar experiences or supports. But we have lots of, we have 3 different standards for dual credit, and Eric can go into that more. I think what is missing would be that, and that goes back to the education plan and profile, is just making sure that students are completing their education plan and profile with fidelity, and so that when they're taking dual credit classes, they are really meeting those goals. That's the piece that we're missing, and that's not as big a fix as trying to start a whole new program.
Great, really important clarification. And so, Beth, do you see a role for this committee in that work?
Advocating, possibly. I'm not sure if we can, I don't know. Let Eric talk some, because I think he's got some important information too.
Yeah, kind of thinking it through.
Eric, please.
Sorry, thinking it through a little bit still, but part of another team, Heck and ODE right now, and research partners from Education Northwest. We're one of 7 states working on policy development in the dual enrollment, dual credit arena right now. It's very early days with that project. It was a competitive process, and so we're excited to have been selected. Washington's one of the other states. We know the Washington leaders in the running start space. And one of the things we've talked about with our Oregon project is creating kind of a little advisory group of some sort. So I do see a potential synergy there. If this group takes on something with dual enrollment, we've got this pre-existing effort happening or parallel effort happening. I wouldn't want this group to kind of go too far with that without kind of trying to align those things a little bit. Perhaps someone in this group would want to be part of a fledgling advisory group that we're looking at for that other project. That may be a good starting point.
That's great. Okay, that's great. That's exactly why I asked. I wanted to make sure we weren't missing something, but what it sounds like to me, Beth and Eric, is that there are things sort of at work, and it is a bit of a myth that it doesn't exist, because it does, right? It's just not consistent. And so this committee could have an advocacy role at the right time for something like expansion of dual enrollment and running start. Does that sound right, Eric? Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Okay, good. So then one more loop back, and Charlie, you may be able to answer this, and others as well. But when we think about OES, right? I mean, what you all have definitely talked about also is just how to expand and how to build awareness. And so I'm curious, thoughts on that, sort of separate from the foundational math and science and AI conversation.
Yeah, I think what you're alluding to is that from a committee standpoint, what else needs to be done to keep OAS moving forward, and I think that's the stumbling. Right. I think that's the stumbling block that we have, where we're not a fiscal agent, and that's really of its core. So we've created a program, we've created curriculum through other grants and so forth, but advising industry so that they create currency within that conversation is critical. Being able to support continuing training and interaction with all of the various publics that are showing interest in OES is also critical. Plus then, as Sherry has brought up, there are creative ways that you could use it depending upon how a building or a CBO or somebody else tries to integrate it within a program. So for instance, with Team Oregon Build, they came up with this program and they connected that Oregon Build program with Kroc Center, and they created magically this program where they integrated those things together and those principles. And it happened like that. I mean, it was amazing. So it's that kind of thing that I think what I don't want to see is the continuance of great effort that goes by the wayside because we can't find somebody's budget to tuck ourselves into. And so I think that's a remaining responsibility of this committee, to be honest with you, is that every person on this call really needs to be passionate about the fact that if they're talking to their industry counterparts, for instance, are they aware of this? If they're not aware of this, why aren't they aware of this? And what can they do to participate and move it forward? So those are the kinds of things. And then again, I see Howard shaking his head there. Our integration, even with the higher ed system, he sees it every day talking to employers looking at Oregon. I just saw the statistical page where Oregon ranks so low in regard to so many of the education parts. And some of that is just simply the way the students are represented in the process. So that speaks to exactly why OES is critical. So that's my thoughts.
That's great. Thank you. Howard, did you have a comment or thought on that?
No, I was nodding in agreement. I wasn't looking to add anything to that. I will tell you that I am, or tell everybody that I am in the process of creating a workforce advisory board to support that I do. And its function is specifically to create a group of advisors from corporate America in Oregon who can guide us as to what are those mission critical skills that they need to have people skilled in to be able to get that entry level job or better if they could. But it's really, rather than taking chances, it's really, we're trying to be making decisions about what kind of curriculum is developed and so forth based on the guidance and the input from this, this board that I am putting together.
So may I ask, what is the outreach? Like, how many students does OES reach? Is it something that they voluntarily sign up for, or do you just go into schools and make everyone aware of it?
I'll take a shot at it. Sherry has trained a lot of teachers, but what we don't have is we don't have hard data in the buildings about which teachers have actually followed up, and which is another problem that we have because it's not a mandated program. It's very difficult in some cases to be able to collect information on who's using it and who's not using it and to what degree. And so that's another issue that we have to deal with. And again, we have this collective group here, and we can throw that problem on the table, and then we can get some various perspectives and say, why can't we do this? What are some ways we need to do? And then have the advice of the agencies as well as industry kind of talking back and forth together. But hard objective data right now, Sarala, is very difficult to gather. Mm-hmm. So Sherry?
Yeah, I would say that, we talk a lot about lack of funding or building a program and then, like having the gap. And so we had about a 4-month gap where there was nobody minding OES, so to speak. And so emails were going in and nobody was on the other end of that. We have rectified that problem right now, and I've taken a part-time contract through ODE, and so now I'm back kind of minding that shop, so to speak. But there will come a day where, again, if we drop off and we don't have somebody funded to be doing that kind of work, then you can have a 3 or 4 month gap where you can't get that data. You can't even know who's out there struggling with maybe to do something. So we're doing better. And hopefully that will not happen again. But that is one of the things that happened when we came to the end of our funds and then went, okay, now we have the product, but there was not a lot of forethought into those kinds of things. So I think that's one of the tasks of this committee, is to always be thinking about when something's being created, how does it get sustained? And I learned a lot about the need for marketing. I don't think especially in education, we're not marketers, right? But on the other hand, when we think about what kids need to know from us, in essence, we kind of do need to market. That's part of that awareness piece. So yeah, Charlie's correct. We have tracked somewhere around 240 different agencies that we have trained. So it is a lot. But how many teachers in a particular school, we don't have that kind of data. We know which schools have someone at their school teaching it. We have a lot of CBOs that are using it. We have some workforce development programs that are using it. But there's not capacity on my part to build and look backwards and to gather all that. But it's a weakness.
Well, I'd love to have this discussion some other time, because I see there's another presentation up here on the chat, but that I've been hearing this sort of thematically. Like, I was talking to Deb and she was saying Oregon STEM has, there's so many resources, but we have to beg teachers to come and get trained, right? I heard this from NC WIT, National for Women Information Technology. They actually get funded by the NSF. So we don't know what's going to happen right now, but they have put out this whole thing about engineering, teach engineering. So they're moving from computer science to engineering now. And they're like, well, whom should I go and share this with? And is a teacher going to have time? So I think there could be this other theme where there are all these resources, and how do we make it more effective and make it frictionless and go into the schools, right?
So I want to bring some closure to this, but I very much appreciate coming back to Running Start and coming back to OES, because what this tells me is that it does feel to me, based on this conversation, and this is now the third conversation that you have had around what is it that this committee wants to focus on, and what's going to make the most sense. It feels to me, obviously, there is continued advocacy and promotion and work to be done around OES. But what you have also potentially added here is, and I'm going to put this in the chat just as sort of a rephrase of what Venkat said, just to test it out. But researching, advocating, and spurring innovation and implementation for tools that assist teachers and students with industry-relevant math and science concepts, pedagogy customized to unique student learning needs. Just as a summary. Now, what we also then have talked about, I've heard a couple times, is there is sort of a business plan, right? that comes with this, or that gets created, that is mapping the programs and connections in the board's network of partners to get the info and tools and support out. Is it your role to do the research? And that includes checking in, which was also in the chat, with existing industry entities like the industry consortia, right, in technology, manufacturing, and healthcare, including the semiconductor consortia. There's also an energy consortia. Right there are 5 existing industry groups, right, that are directly connected to the board's network. So doing the research related to industry need and the tools that are out there, creating the package. I said top 5 program audiences that you could figure out, create the marketing. To your point, I think Sherry made the point, right, that we don't always do this really well, but there are board members who do, right? So how do we use that? Really figuring out how to push recommendations to the governor's office, particularly because you're hooking in to one of her top priorities, getting serious about finding funding to get liftoff and sustain going forward. So if first, like, does that feel right? And then I would like to spend just the last 15 minutes here talking about, what does this look like in 6 months? What does this look like in 1 year? And that includes, again, talking funding, because this has been surfaced a number of times. Is that a role that you want to play? Charlie?
Yeah, Lindsay, what I'd like to do is have a break in this presentation, because Beth, we had a task assignment to really help define, and I think it plays into this conversation at this point. So Beth Wiggum, can I insert you into this conversation now for about 5 minutes? And then, because she's really coming back to this group with some definitional pieces. And again, I think it will actually coalesce with what we're doing here. So Beth, can I turn it over to you now?
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. Yeah, I'm hoping to make a bit of connection at the end. So hi, everyone. I'm Beth Wiggum. I work at the Oregon Department of Education. My position supports school counseling programs and career and college readiness. So a lot of the topics we've been talking about kind of swirl around my bodies of work. But I've been asked to talk specifically about some updates. There's a career readiness definition work group, which is kind of a subcommittee of this workforce readiness committee. And the work group was tasked with coming up with a career readiness definition. So Deb Mumhill was really the one that's kind of leading this committee, this work group. And she is really helping envision what bringing together a career readiness definition could look like, helping to kind of really create a clear shared definition that aligns across the Oregon Department of Education, within our CTE and our STEM work out of ODE, with HEC, and then also with workforce. So across that there's alignment. And then with the goal really around being better to, finding ways to better support students, workers, and employers statewide. So we know that Oregon's workforce is evolving fast. You know, we're already hearing there's a shortage, there's a need for pipeline, and that there's work around that. And also that we're finding that there's a need for a definition across the K-16, which really reflects the skills, opportunities, and pathways required for success. So Deb, what she did was she facilitated, we had to break into 2 work groups. And so 2 different work groups met in March. And some of the things that we talked about were the background and rationale for a career readiness definition. How does that connect to a workforce strategy? We talked about the need for agencies, leaderships to sponsor this work and to create a joint definition. Also, we talked about where is there alignment across other efforts that have happening, where is there some policies that we can pull from, and then strategic plans as well. And then we also talked about that there's already a current college and career readiness definition for Oregon. It was developed back in 2014. And then there are some recommendations that came out of HEC in 2022 for revising the college and career readiness definition, and also came up with some metrics as well for college and career readiness. And so we kind of talked around those. I'll share those 2 in the chat, just some hyperlinks. They've been in the chat before in previous meetings, but just to give you some context if you ever want to look at those. Then what we did is we talked about a new proposed career readiness definition for Oregon. And so what Deb did was some preliminary work. So she looked across the nation, what's out there, what do we have in Oregon that we can connect to? You know, we have a CCL definition, we have a CCR definition, we have our higher education and career path skills course from requirements from Senate Bill 3 that has some connection points. So basically what she did, she used AI across all of that information that she put into the system, the AI system, and it was able to kind of get a definition, which is kind of a proposed definition. And Deb would like me to share it at this time. However, know that it is still in the works and that there's going to be a process that needs to happen for that. So Let me put that, what the definition is, in the chat for you all. This is the draft definition. And you can see here, it includes 3 different components. So career readiness is defined in terms of the 3 indicators, which include the ability to A, describe a clear future career and occupational goals, B, identify high demand, high wage opportunities, and then C, describe future learning and post-secondary training and education that aligns to their goals. So that's what she kind of pulled across from all of that. So when she brought the 2 work groups together, we just had opportunity to kind of talk a little bit about it and about, some of the other information that we had been operating under for the last few years, the other definitions, to kind of see where there was some alignment, what made sense. And so I wanted to share this with you. She also came up with some pillars that kind of came out of AI across all that information. And so there are some pillars. What we'd like to do is be able to share that at a future meeting when we're further along the way. But I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of the preliminary draft. And then some of our next steps are, we talked about creating a white paper document for ODE and HEC leadership to endorse career readiness definition work group. So there's typically a process that we go through between both agencies where, that it needs to be priority of the agency. They'll pull together who they think they'll identify who should be a part of those work groups. We can always provide recommendations from this committee. And then what we'll do is there's going to be a process for who else needs to be included, and then as well as feedback. There should be some very thorough feedback mechanisms in place. And so all of that would be a part of the work. So what ODE and HEC staff are going to do, so Higher Education the Higher Education Coordinating Commission and ODE can work together with this committee to seek feedback from agency leads to get approval for prioritizing this work. And then I mentioned about, that there'll be that process that we'll go through. But looking broader, so Deb really wanted me to speak to looking a little bit broader than the career readiness definition. The goal is really to align a career readiness strategy with state and national workforce strategies. So this could look like the career readiness strategy aligning with workforce and education strategic plans, from the WTDB strategic plan, from WIOA plans, from HEC goals, from ODE's CCL strategy, also as well as CTE STEM, and then employer-led workforce development initiatives. So kind of bringing all of those together to really form a cohesive, aligned strategy. So the thinking around that was that this could really assist with everything from creating a system statewide around alignment, that there's regional implementation and relevance. We would be moving from an older CCR definition, college career readiness definition, to that one that was, so back then it was developed kind of around the Common Core at that time. And so we would be moving to more of a career specific definition that kind of pulls out career and embeds educational standards and workforce development concepts, policies within that. And then last, it could also, the WTDB could incorporate the career readiness definition into state workforce planning and possibly into a workforce scorecard. And that's one of the things that we had been talking about in the last meeting. So the thinking is if combined, so let me summarize, if combined, the proposed definition for career readiness with a career readiness strategy can really help ensure that Oregon students graduate not just prepared for a job, but that they're really equipped for what comes next, career growth opportunities in their future. And so that's kind of where we're heading, and kind of like a connection to the bigger picture with the work around the career readiness definition, linking to some of those other strategies and align that together. So that's all that I'm going to share for now, but we do want to come back and share as we get further down the road with our progress, if that's okay.
Actually, that'd be wonderful. And again, I think there is some crosswork that, for the conversation we've had today, with these definitions and making sure that there is alignment there as well. So thank you for the perfect, the great work. And I appreciate the links. I had not seen those before. And so I'm a little overwhelmed when I look at a definition being 13 to 23 pages long.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Lindsay, I'll turn the
Great.
floor back to you.
Yes, well, and just in the time that we have, I think that I appreciate this, and thank you, Charlie, for making sure that we got to that, because you're absolutely right that it's highly relevant to, I think, the areas of focus that you are going down, or starting to think that you're going to go down. So here's what I'm going to suggest. I think there has been a tremendous amount put into the chat, in addition to, I think, really, really good discussion and homing in on where this committee can go. And so I am going to suggest actually that we wrap this up simply by saying, and I'll just ask one more question. I am going to put together some draft materials for you to reflect on and test out with you. And this is going to include actually a revised charter, just sort of based on where your conversations have gone for this committee, but also then just a draft of priorities and some steps that you potentially could take to get liftoff on the areas that you're focusing on. I am assuming that the definitions, Beth, that you just shared, this very much is the backdrop for much of the work that this committee does, right? In other words, a set of criteria. Charlie, do you see that as the same, in the same way, that these are backdrop, this is context, the priorities that this committee focuses on?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I think we're using the term workforce readiness, but you could actually throw career readiness, but yeah.
Okay, great. So then the only question that I want to ask, with the handful who have stuck it out for 2 hours, and again, thank you for this conversation, is, oh, thanks, Sarla. Yes, actually, you know what? I really think that is included and embedded in this, because when Sarla's point about women and minorities in STEM, I truly think your initial comments build into the ideas of how do we actually assist teachers and students with industry relevant math and science concepts, especially looking at the data of which students really need this and which students need to hear this. And so per your equity and diversity goals as a board, I think this committee also can make choices about certain population groups, including women, that may warrant a higher priority. So I thank you for putting that in there. So I just want to ask, if I do a revision of the charter, if I put together just sort of some draft ideas of what your priorities are, what you've said today, and what your next steps are. First of all, does that sound good? And then second of all, is there anything that really came out of this conversation? And Charlie, I'll let you kick this off. That you're feeling good about, that you see real opportunity in, and then on the flip side, anything that we need to get back to that you feel like we didn't touch on today.
Yeah, you do such a good job of synthesizing. First of all, I am amazingly thankful for that ability, because I think that's part of how you take a very, very broad conversation and put it into things that I think we can grasp a hold of. I think the thing I'm probably most excited about is, again, more of a continuance to say, how do we make sure a good program that's been developed gets carried through? But I think when we're kind of focusing in onto that whole tools subject, I think there is value in the way we convene that can add value to that over time. We have things in CTE called programs of study. I'm not even sure how the process adopts those into its system and makes sure that it works through. But the thoughts about consistency across the state of Oregon, I think, are important pieces. There's obviously resource issues that are going to be here. So I think we will still, as a committee, kind of have some difficulties with trying to draw the line of where we can have influence and what that influence looks like. But personally, I'd like to see us be an advisor to the governor, meaning we advise the governor in directions we would recommend, rather than simply responding to the governor's own priorities. I think that that's an important, and I heard that in the conversation today.
Great, great. That's great. Really strengthening that muscle. Yes, and I think that aligns with where the overall board really wants to go as well. Okay. Any other thoughts and comments on what came out of today, or what you want to see next?
I think a responsibility for everybody. Number one, the chat is extensive, so it would probably behoove all of you, as your assignment, to go back through that chat and read it through. There's some tremendous commentary and links and so forth. I have not been able to keep up with them, so I will do the same. But the other side is, as you are at your points of getting your synthesis to go public. Again, the piece that I would ask each of the members is spend some time with the charter and so forth, and take a look back at the reason that this committee has garnered your interest, and whether that continues to garner your interest, and if it does or doesn't, then any reasons that or things you'd want to change. So I think this charter is a very important piece of that. So
that's great. Thanks, Charlie. Okay. Well, Todd, anything that you think we need to touch on?
I think it was all very good. Thank you, everybody that's still here for being here and for being passionate about this work. Thank you, Lindsay. Excellent job. Charlie, thanks for your leadership. Once again, thanks Beth Wiggum, and Mullenkamp, but Beth Wiggum for jumping in and sharing that work that we're doing in the subcommittee. So I look forward to seeing the documents and the revised charter that you float with us, Lindsay. And once again, great job.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Enjoy the book Astoria, Lindsay.
I am going to get it. I love that recommendation. Thank you.